fire and blood. These are the words of House Targaryen. For nearly 300 years, the silver-haired descendants of Aegon Targaryen ruled Westeros, until Robert Baratheon rebelled, and with one swing of his hammer, ended the dynasty.
But the bloodline survives in the veins of Daenerys Targaryen, the last surviving child of the Mad King Aerys, and in Jon Snow, known to the realm as the Bastard King in the North. But in actuality, Aegon, son of the late Crown Prince Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark of Winterfell. This is the path to the throne, the Targaryens.
The journey begins in Valyria, the Targaryen ancestral homeland. Hundreds of years before the show, Valyria reached the glorious pinnacle of its power. Once, it was the most advanced civilization in the known world, until the Doom.
More than a century before the Targaryen invasion, Valyria was destroyed in less than a day. The earth split open, lakes boiled, and geysers of molten rock rained over the land. Valyria was gone, leaving only cursed ruins.
All the Dragon Lords perished, except for House Targaryen. A dozen years before the cataclysm, Daenerys the Dreamer Targaryen had a vision of what was to come. At her behest, the Targaryen family headed west, with all their wealth and their dragons to the island of Dragonstone, and it was there, 99 years after Daenerys' dream, that Aegon the Conqueror was born.
He was 25 years old when he and his sister wives, their 3 dragons, and a modest force set sail from Dragonstone to invade Westeros.
For the next 283 years, a Targaryen sat the throne that Aegon had cast from the swords of the defeated. During that time, the Targaryen custom of incestuous marriage kept power centralized in royal hands. The drawback was that Targaryens tended towards madness, the fate that befell King Aerys II, the Mad King.
Aerys' moods were unpredictable. Befitting the Targaryen words, he became enthralled with fire and blood. But fire most of all, delighting in burning alive those he considered foes. The realm grew mutinous.
Ironically, Aerys' wanton brutality was not the spark that lit the fire of rebellion. Instead, it was an act of love, misunderstood as an act of violence. The realm was scandalized when Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna, who had long been betrothed to Robert Baratheon. When Rickard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, and his eldest son Brandon marched to the Red Keep for justice, the Mad King executed them. Robert and Ned Stark, Rickard's second son and Robert's best friend, rose in rebellion. Robert prevailed, slaying Rhaegar himself during the Battle of the Trident.
When the news reached King's Landing, Aerys had his newly pregnant queen and his young son and now heir Prince Viserys evacuated to Dragonstone. 9 months later, as a storm battered the island, sinking what remained of the fleet, the queen gave birth to Daenerys Stormborn, and then the queen died. A loyal knight smuggled Viserys and Daenerys to Essos, where they would live as little more than beggars until we meet them in the first episode of Season 1.
The fates of Viserys and Daenerys were known to the realm, but there was a secret known only to Eddard Stark, now Lord of Winterfell. When the war was over, Ned returned home with a babe, the product, he said, of an uncharacteristic wartime dalliance. This was a lie.
As the last battles of Robert's rebellion smoldered, Ned and a few companions followed Rhaegar's trail to a lonely holdfast called the Tower of Joy, safeguarded by members of the Kingsguard. This was curious, for the role of these white-cloaked knights is to protect the king or his heirs with their lives. What were they doing here?
The Kingsguard were defeated, but at great cost. Inside, Ned found Lyanna near death in a bed soaked with blood. She had just given birth to a boy. Rhaegar, she told her brother, had not kidnapped her. They had been in love. And in secret, the prince had his marriage to the princess Elia Martell annulled. He and Lyanna were lawfully wedded. The child Lyanna cried was named Aegon, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. She swore Ned to a vow. Protect Aegon, hide him, keep him safe from Robert. Promise me, she cried, and then she died. Ned kept his promise. When he died, executed on the orders of King Joffrey, the truth of Jon's identity seemingly died with him.
Jon's bastard standing has defined his life. He set off to join the Night's Watch with Ghost by his side and a fierce desire to belong. He found friends and purpose, slayed a white and earned a Valyrian steel sword, embedded with the wildlings and learned different truths of leadership. He broke his vows with Ygritte, then broke her heart. And after taking command at the Battle for the Wall, his brothers named him Lord Commander.
Jon proved his courage anew at Hardhome, slaying a White Walker and watching the Night King raise the army of the dead. But Jon had come in the first place to rescue wildlings and bring them south, displaying his moral compass and highly unconventional style. Outraged, a group of mutineers assassinated their Lord Commander.
But Jon's watch didn't end. Melisandre resurrected him, and freed by death of his vow to the Night's Watch, Jon found himself reunited with Sansa, and at her urging, they regained Winterfell from Bolton rule. After, Jon's bannermen named him King in the North.
Meanwhile, in the east, when we first met Daenerys, her brother Viserys, and the wealthy, mysterious Illyrio, who had arranged for Dany to wed Khal Drogo, the leader of a fearsome Dothraki Khalasar.
Viserys' quest to reclaim his father's throne ended with him claiming a deadly golden crown of his own. But he was not the last dragon, and in his measly shadow, Dany's legend grew.
Dany gained allies and dragon eggs as well, and after losing her husband Drogo and their unborn child, she rose from the flames of the funeral pyre, the Unburnt, carrying 3 dragons. Word of the Dragon Queen spread, dead. And though Dany faced many trials, she secured an army of Unsullied. And as she freed the chained of Slaver's Bay, the breaker of chains emerged.
She ruled in Meereen to prove herself as queen and gained new Westerosi allies. And even after a rebellion cast her out, she returned to abolish her enemies and then set sail for Westeros.
At last, Dany alighted on Dragonstone, her forebearer's seat. She greeted Melisandre and heard tell of the bastard king. She invited him to sail to her, and despite pleas from Sansa and his bannermen, Jon went.
Jon and Dany's initial interactions were as rocky as the seas on which they'd eventually take each other to bed. And so too were Dany's fortunes in war. But despite her losses, she led Drogon and her Dothraki to scorch her Lannister foe.
She found her graciousness and practicality alike by letting Jon cultivate the obsidian in Dragonstone's caves. And when all seemed lost after Jon and Jorah and the others sailed off for Eastwatch to retrieve a white and convince the rest of the realm of the White Walker's return,
Dany came with her dragons. She rescued most of our heroes, but Viserion fell, and then rose again, the Night King's new steed. It was a terrible blow for Dany, but it brought her and Jon closer together. He called her my queen, and they embarked for King's Landing with their fellows, carrying proof of Winter's terrible power and a burgeoning desire for each other.
after failing to win Cersei's true allegiance, they set sail for Winterfell. And on the narrow sea they made love as the truth of Jon's standing as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne revealed itself to Bran and Sam.
Which brings us to Season 8 and the culmination of House Targaryen's decades-long quest to return to power. For the Dragon Lords, the path to the Iron Throne is really a path back to the melted swords of Aegon's enemies, and the two most viable contenders for ruling the Seven Kingdoms now walk it. The question is whether they'll remain united against the cold or turn against each other once the truth surfaces, opening the door for another house and leaving all of Westeros vulnerable to the Night King's icy touch.
Jon and Dany may be joined in some seaborne lovemaking, but they're diametrically opposed in temperament and their desire for power, almost like ice and fire. Dany believes that the Iron Throne is her birthright, and she will fight for it, burning anyone or anything in her way. Her compassion and her heart have defined much of her arc to this point, but when threatened, her fury has often ruled her.
We have to at least wonder if the Mad King's daughter, who burned Randall and Dickon Tarly and others, will fall into the pit of power, paranoia, and the past, becoming the Mad Queen along the way.
Jon, meanwhile, likely won't process the news that he's actually Aegon Targaryen, newly christened incest committer, without at least some signature brooding. Jon's parentage has been the through line of this story, and the ripple effects from discovering his standing as the rightful heir of Westeros will surely define much of Season 8.
Jon, like so many quintessential fantasy heroes, is a gifted but non-traditional leader. He's unlikely to want to pursue the throne, even after learning that it's his by rights. But Jon has a rich history of resisting only to relent and then rule with aplomb. Jon didn't want to be Lord Commander or take Winterfell back from the Boltons or become King in the North. But every time he's accepted a crown, he's gone on to wear it well.
Doing so this time will mean defying Dany or convincing her, and perhaps himself, that their best hope of victory is to unite their claims through marriage. It's possible that they've already united in blood. Dany has long believed herself barren and told Jon as much, but clues point to Dany being able to have children. Jon, who has spent his entire life believing himself a bastard, has made it clear that he'd never be able to father one. If Jon and Dany unknowingly conceived a child as they slammed on the ocean, Jon's history and honor will surely lead him to try and build a family.
He will not want to do so at the expense of all those he's fought for and loved in the North. But as Jon told Theon in Season 7, you don't have to choose. Jon can be a Targaryen and a Stark. He's already bent the knee to Dany despite being the North's king. Could Jon, who as the son of a Stark and a Targaryen is the literal Song of Ice and Fire incarnate, unite these great houses and stave off a different doom? He and Dany have always been the preeminent candidates to emerge as the prince that was promised. Perhaps they can fulfill the prophecy together. Perhaps their child can.
Dany, despite being born into noble stock, was cast from her land and has been branded a foreigner by her enemies since her return. Her dragons spread awe and wonder, but the Dothraki horde at her back still sparks fear, a reality Cersei will continue to exploit.
For Jon, meanwhile, learning the truth at last could come at the expense of acceptance in the North. Cersei's brother Tyrion is already on Dany and Jon's side. Jaime is headed to Winterfell too, so Dany and Jon appear to have both of Cersei's siblings among their ranks, a valuable edge.
But will Sansa, Arya, and Bran stay by Jon's side once his decision to bend the knee to Dany becomes widely known? The Winterfell crypts used to call to Jon in his dreams, whispering that he wasn't a Stark, didn't belong. But a Season 8 teaser places Jon in those crypts, standing by those he always viewed as kin. The pack survives.
If Dany and Jon can stay united, they're better equipped than anyone to defeat the Night King. They're armed with dragonglass and Valyrian steel, known White Walker killers. And Dany has true dragons, which can kill whites and potentially walkers too. Rhaegal needs a rider, and Drogon already has given Jon the sniff seal of approval. Jon and Dany have the tools to win the battles in the North and the South. The question is whether they'll also have each other.